Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another episode with David Keratin. So today we'll talk about the divine feminine as seen through galactic astrology, the cancel culture and its links to a dark past of witch hunting in the Middle Ages, medieval Europe, and the important role of Ophiuchus and the return of Mother Sophia to astrology, and how this relates to the tree of life, which has been manipulated by the male patriarchy with one intention: to eliminate references to Sophia, Mother God. Those of you who are new, my name is David Keratin. I am a galactic astrologer with 30 years experience. I'm a philosopher, EDM DJ. You can check out my playlist on my YouTube channel. And I'm a Chief Experience Officer, or CXO, of my own business called Keratin Consulting. We provide strategic and geopolitical advice and commentary and leadership development. Much of what I do in the business world crosses over to the spiritual world, although I do keep the two pages separate. I've got different profiles, one under Keratin Consulting and the other under David Keratin. I am an indigo warrior and old soul. If you've listened to Dolores Cannon at any time, she talks about the different waves of star seeds that have come onto the planet. I'm one of the first wavers. Gen Xers is what she calls those of us who came in the mid-60s, early 70s. For a fun fact, I am a Libra Sun, Taurus rising with an Aries North Node in my 11th house. I have an Ophiuchus moon, which as a male is interesting energy to integrate into my personal soul journey for this incarnation. Now I'm going to do a screen share and we're going to jump around a little bit. I'll bring up firstly quite an amusing some of you may have seen this, but I think that this is a fascinating place to start this conversation. These photos, Rowan Atkinson, of course, very famous actor, British actor, and there are these photos which are trending all over social media, perhaps not in the US, but certainly in the rest of the world. Not only for the photos and what they represent and the iconography, which will lead beautifully into our discussion today using galactic astrology to have a look at the divine feminine and how that energy is manifesting and coming through. But this here is a crossover into the real world, if you like, of 3D form, where we see this very famous actor sitting on, a parody of a modern day chariot with a witch's broom, holding a teddy bear. We have a look at another couple of photos here. Mr. Bean actor Rowan Atkinson compares cancel culture to medieval mob looking for someone to burn. And this is all very interesting. Often we see in art either a parody or an allegory of life, and they say that art mimics life or life mimics art, whichever way you want to look at that. But very interesting imagery, but more importantly, his not only the imagery of the kind of the fool, if you like, in the ancient tarot, but it's what he's actually saying that's pretty important. I love this one here. I've seen this on Twitter. Although, given what's going on, is probably considered to be conservative culture. But look, be that as it may, absolutely fascinating, as I said, and the iconography here of just a beautiful, he's just got such an amazing sense of humour. But this is just a little bit of text that I pulled down from a news article that was actually released in India, of all places. And I think that this is a nice intro into the discussion today. Atkinson was famous for his role, of course, as Mr. Bean, and he celebrated his birthday on January the 6th. This year he has turned 55, although I've seen other, I don't know whether it's 55 or 66, doesn't really matter. There's other media that's saying he's 66. And I think, you know, this whole thing of January 6th and he's turning 66 is all a bit of a hoot. But there we go. Look, this article's got him turning 55. But what he's been saying is trending massively on social media. And during a recent interaction, Rowan's statement on cancel culture has grabbed eyeballs and has become a topic of discussion on the internet. The veteran English actor compared it to a medieval mob roaming the streets looking for someone to burn. As per reports, Rowan told the Radio Times, quote, "The problem we have with online is that the algorithm decides what we want to see, and this ends up creating a simplistic binary view of society. It becomes a case of either you are with us or against us, and if you are against us, you deserve to be cancelled." He further spoke about the fear of the future, stating, "It is important that we are exposed to a wide spectrum of opinion, but what we have now is the digital equivalent of the medieval mob roaming the streets looking for someone to burn. So it is scary for anyone who's a victim of that mob, and it fills me with fear about the future," quote, close quote. So that's Rowan Atkinson, the famous actor, and as I said, when you look at this imagery, it's fascinating. It's very curated, but it segues nicely in what we're going to touch on today in terms of the divine feminine. Now, I put up a chart which I'll share now. So this is, again, if you've seen my other videos and you've listened to any of my other blogs, you will know that I use the galactic zodiac, 13-wheel zodiac, which includes the 13th sign of Ophiuchus, although in the constellations, Ophiuchus isn't the 13th sign. Ophiuchus is actually the 9th constellation. As the sun moves through the ecliptic or through the constellations, Ophiuchus comes after the constellation of Scorpius. And if you look to the night sky, you'll see this quite clearly. The Ophiuchus constellation sits in between Scorpius, Ophiuchus, and then Capricorn. When Ophiuchus is inserted into the astrological wheel, she's actually the 9th sign, but she's the 13th constellation. And the number 13, we're going to talk about that later, is very, very important in terms of the relationship to the divine feminine. I'm going to quote from some blogs and some different articles and research that I've picked up from the net. So some of this isn't necessarily my intellectual property or my creation, but it's certainly worth reflecting on what commentators are saying around the world about the number 13 particularly, and how that relates to the divine feminine. So before we dive into this chart here has most of the inner planets or outer planets removed. For the purposes of this discussion today, I only wanted to look at, I do have some of the headers like Saturn here, Jupiter here, and Urania here. But mostly this is a divine feminine chart. These are the astrological archetypes and characters, symbols, engrams, personifications, planetoids, planets, whatever you want to call them. As I've talked about before, the beauty of astrology is that it is a map of consciousness, and it shows us, it gives us a cohesive and comprehensive way to understand the different facets of how we as individuals can express ourselves, and obviously how source consciousness and the many, many guises and faces and roles that source consciousness or the universal intelligence or God, whichever term you use to choose, can express him or herself at different times depending on the occasion. I love the galactic astrology because it includes we have the ability to include some of these planetoids and asteroids which have only been discovered. One of them, for example, Sedna, was only discovered officially in 2004. So some of the old systems don't have any references to these modern higher level 5D, 6D, 7D consciousness or levels of consciousness that are emerging. And a lot of them are feminine energies. And so we're going to talk about these feminine energies. And mainly this will be about the rise of the divine feminine. And as I mentioned in the outset, I actually have my own moon in Ophiuchus, and my sun is in Libra, so I do have a fair bit of divine feminine, I guess, flowing through, certainly on my moon side, which is interesting from a male perspective, but look, that is what it is, and I chose that before I incarnated on the other side of the veil. I chose to incarnate under that astrological configuration, and with my Aries North Node in the 11th house, that's, you know, this is me finding my voice as a male, about a very important issue anyway. So we're going to have a look at Vesta and some of the symbolism and the engrams and the metaphors and allegories and archetypes of Vesta. Very important. That's her there sitting at 32 degrees Leo, and as I've mentioned in other blogs, because we're using the galactic zodiac, which is a sidereal chart which reflects the time that the sun or any planet spends in each constellation as per the science. We know that Leo, for example, is around 35, 36 degrees. So that's how long the sun takes to progress through the sign of Leo. So that's why you see a Leo at 32 degrees. And what that means, of course, is if you're using, I've mentioned this before, but if you're using the galactic zodiac, and for any of you that wish to play around with this technology, we'll include a link to the software in the show notes below. But you would find that some people will go, oh, well, how can there be 32 degrees of Leo? Well, that's because the constellation of Leo has around 35 degrees, and therefore, and that's the time that the sun spends traversing that particular constellation. So if you were using the Western system, which I have talked at length about, the common system, the Placidus system, the Babylonian system, or the Roman astrology called the Ptolemaic system, which is the one which, if you click on the web, this is the information that you'll get the most access to. It's embedded in most websites. Most bloggers, astrological bloggers, are talking about and using interpretations, but the Western astrology uses 12 signs, 12 even signs of 30 degrees each, which is out of alignment, and it's a false overlay compared to the organic cycles of the sun and the moon and all the planets through the constellations. So 32 degrees Leo would actually be 2 degrees of Virgo. So anybody who has a planet, sun, moon, rising sign, whatever, North Node at 2 degrees Virgo is actually a Leo. But look, I talk about that extensively elsewhere, but this is why, just to explain where Vesta, for example, is sitting at 32 degrees Leo. So we're going to have a look at her. We'll have a look at some of the Roman and Greek stories and mythology, and how those allegories and stories just help to make sense of that archetype, that divine feminine archetype in modern times. We'll have a look at Juno. I touched on her the other day in my blog about the new moon, but we'll go a little bit deeper on Juno and her placement, which I think is just groundbreaking as she moves through the sign of Ophiuchus, which is here. Juno moving through Ophiuchus is profound for both individuals and humanity, especially those on a spiritual path, but we'll touch on her. She's very, very important in terms of relationships, twin flame relationships. A lot of divine feminine energy mixed up there with Juno and Ophiuchus. we'll touch on, I've only got, I've got Pluto, Saturn and the Sun here just for illustration. We're not going to talk about them today. And Uranian energy is just, again, just for illustration. And the reason I put them in there is just to remind us that Uranian energy is, in the ancient tarot, is the tower, and that is the enlightenment energy, which is currently being transmitted from the house of Aries, the first house in the zodiac, which is where, in the true galactic zodiac, the Uranus or Uranian energy is located at the moment and is transmitting via the square. So there is a lightning strike, if you like, hitting this house of Capricorn, which is the house of Saturn, the Tower of Babel, and there's a lot going on here. So I've done that just for illustration, but we're going to look at the divine feminine energy of Vesta. So I'll touch on some of the mythology and the fables and the myths and the legends, which are allegories that help us to understand, you know, the astrology is an archetype, it's a symbol, it's an engram, it's a character, it's a role that we can play. So I don't find astrology to be, I don't use it for prediction or divination. I use it more as to illustrate the potential energy that if you consciously are aware of it, you can meditate on it, and we will talk about how to manifest using the 13th energy of the Ein Sof and the Tree of Life. We're going to go deep today. I'm going to take this to a dimensional, six-dimensional level. As an indigo first waver, I came in with my six-dimensional third eye was already, that's part of what being an indigo is about. I came in with it deactivated, but I just had to wait for my time, the time in history and for the time-space continuum. So I've come in with quite high vibrational energy, and whilst this isn't about me, if you looked at my chart, for most of you that study astrology, you would see that it's pretty incredible. So, you know, I'm extremely confident that when I'm talking about astrology, I'm bringing not just 30 years of knowledge to the table, but past life astrology as well, and a very, very deep understanding of how astrology overlays with the Tree of Life, overlays with numerology, and overlays with the ancient tarot. So I'll often jump in and out of astrology, tarot, Tree of Life, but the Ein Sof, Ophiuchus, the 13th sign, and we'll have a look at the Tree of Life in a moment, or later on, is what they call the Kether, which is the crown, which is the 10th Sephiro. But what most people don't realise, because the patriarchy have abused and misused this divine information about the Tree of Life, and it's been completely turned into a male system, left brain male system. What they don't understand is that the Ein Sof or Ophiuchus energy sits at the crown, and that beyond the veils, we've all heard the expression beyond the veils, Ophiuchus is beyond the veils. So the argument, and certainly one that I subscribe to, is that the creative force of life is feminine energy, it's not masculine energy. Everyone talks about the male God, and there certainly is a male Godhead, but there's a female Godhead, and they both operate together. But the mother is the life-giving force, and the father is form. And that is consistent with the left brain, right brain idea that the masculine energy is the creative energy. It's the form energy. It's the energy of physical form. Whereas the right brain, feminine energy, is the creative energy. And life comes from the female. It comes from the Ein Sof. It comes from the feminine energy. It comes from the womb of the mother. And when we look at the Tree of Life, if you've not understood the role of Ophiuchus in the 13th sign and why many of the battles that are going on at the moment are not really being fought, as the expression goes, not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. The fight is over, the return of the divine feminine, and some of what I share today might be quite shocking in a good way. And I'm really excited to be talking about this. I know that when I was meditating this morning, it was made very clear to me that do a blog, do a live review just off the cuff about the divine feminine. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about Ophiuchus in the 13th sign and Gemini, Juno, Vesta. In Dark Moon Lilith, I talked about her the other day with my full moon, dark moon and light moon. So we all see the white moon. I call this the black moon. She's got 3 or 4 names: Black Moon Lilith, Dark Moon Lilith. But she is absolutely critical in terms of the return of the divine feminine. And right now, as I mentioned in another blog, when you look at the location of Dark Moon Lilith, which is the shadow side of the divine feminine, which goes back to the cancel culture, which is why I started with the Rowan Atkinson visual, is that all of that shadow, the witchcraft, the hunting of the witches, the burning at the stake, the mocking of the pagan rituals, the moon cycles, the moon worship, all of that female shamanism in contact with the land and the cycles of the land, all of that mocking is contained in the engram or the metaphor and allegory and stories of Dark Moon Lilith, which is where the suppressed feminine has been. And at this full moon, as I mentioned recently, she is conjunct the sun, and she is also conjunct Jupiter and Saturn. And also here, which I didn't touch on in my full moon blog, was this sign here is a divine feminine sign. This is the sign of Pallas Athena. Pallas Athena is the warrior princess, and she's a very, very important role when we talk about the new type of leadership, which is represented here by Poseidon sitting in the sign of Libra. Libra is the sign of balance. Libra is the sign of justice. Libra is the sign of the scales of justice. And if you look at the card for Libra, it's represented by, you know, a masculine and feminine energy that's working together. So this is, whilst this is a male persona energy, this is what they call one of the centaurs or trans-Neptunians rather, Poseidon energy. That's energy that's only coming into consciousness in the last 30, 40 years. He is currently sitting as a potential for all of humanity as to the new type of leader. So the Pallas Athena down here is also in conjunction with this full moon, and Pallas Athena and Lilith are playing a key role in what will emerge now is beginning to emerge into culture and humanity, and what we'll start to see more of going forward. And down here, we're going to talk about Ceres or Persephone. There's a lot of stories about Persephone, and we'll touch on those briefly, and how she was abducted against her will by Hades or Pluto, and she was taken underground and forced to marry Pluto. And there's a great story about that, which we'll touch on, because a lot of this energy around Vesta and the Vestal Virgins, Juno the consort. Juno was married to Zeus. Zeus was a philanderer, an adulterer. If you want to look at it from that perspective, he wasn't faithful, and Juno was the faithful consort. But for every aspect of this divine feminine energy, there are shadow aspects, and there are positive and negative aspects. And so, you know, look, Juno coming through Ophiuchus is very, very interesting. It's a time of reckoning, to be honest, for some of those, for some of the stories about the role of the female in a relationship, and we'll talk about that. So the divine feminine energies, this is primarily about that. So we're looking to look at Vesta, Juno, Dark Moon Lilith, Pallas Athena, the warrior princess Ceres, the mother protector energy, and we're going to look at finally Sedna, and the location. Sedna is in a beautiful, beautiful spot for her. She's the female shaman, and she is sitting there in Taurus, which is a great position, of course, for a female shaman and the return of that energy. Now, Let me just change the screen share here. I'm going to do a new share. Go back to Rowan Atkinson. I'm going to do a little bit of reading, and I like to actually operate a little bit off the cuff, but I've made some notes because I think it's very important to convey and make sure that I convey everything that I wanted to get across. And I was thinking about this now. What you're looking at here is the tree of life. And I'm not going to do a full analysis on the tree of life, but we will look at it partially and how it relates to the flow of the divine feminine, and how this, what they call the Ketha, which is the crown, Sophia, and you see these three names, Ein Sophia, Ein Soph, and Ein. They are existing, they are energies, and we'll touch on those because it's very important. We'll touch on what all of that means when you look at a true tree of life. Those are the three additional female energies. These are the creative force. This is the divine feminine mother energy in the antimatter realm. So the crown is the merge point. If you're looking at your followers at all of the likes of Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks about creating or manifesting from the field, and he talks about the antimatter and the matter merge point. In other words, where on the veil, Cryon is one of the channelists, he talks about this. There are many spiritual teachers who talk about the line, if you like, between the unseen and the seen, physical and the non-physical, the quantum field and the physical reality, or if you like, 5D with the fourth dimensional astral plane being that in-between space, and the third dimension being the physical realm. So the fifth dimension would be the field, and that is represented by these three energies, which are beyond the veil, which are all feminine energies. So if you add 10 Sephira, which are all of these, and interestingly, the first Sephira, of course, is the kingdom of earth, and you work up through these various pathways, develop, strength and mercy, understanding, and wisdom. And it's interesting also when you look at a proper tree of life icon or graphic, and you really drill down into it, is that these pathways, which are taught in the old sacred schools of developing knowledge and enlightenment, these pathways are all reflected by tarot cards. So there's a tarot card that relates to each of these pathways. So when we look, and there are also planets assigned to each of these Sephiros. And it is interesting that as one moves from an earthbound or 3D reality up through the tree of life, which is to gain knowledge, enlightenment, and understanding, it is interesting the correspondences that you begin to see here is that right at the heart of reality is the sun. Knowledge really kicks in, and it says here Sirius, the star Sirius is part of the key of knowledge. But wisdom, before you get to the crown, and then you get to enlightenment, and you move from the matter realms into the antimatter realms, or you move from, let's say, 3D, 4D into 5D and above. Wisdom is considered to be one of the keys to enlightenment as per the tree of life, and it's just one system that's been around a long time, and this has been abused, of course, by the Hermetic and the Golden Dawn, and some of the secret societies have manipulated this, but the original was that wisdom came from understanding the zodiac, knowledge comes from understanding the fixed star Sirius, and understanding comes from grasping the role of Saturn. And Saturn is the ruler of the 10th house, and the 10th house, I beg your pardon, in the old system, he's the ruler of the 10th house with Ophiuchus inserted. He's actually the ruler of the 11th house. There are 13 houses now with Ophiuchus there. So Saturn is the ruler of the 11th house, and 11 is a very important number in terms of manifestation. Of course, it's the double one. That's a whole separate story. But this is why when you strip back and get back to antiquity and the real information that's been kept from humanity, including astrology, is that let's just call them the nefarious individuals and those who wanted to keep this knowledge for themselves know absolutely all about astrology, and they don't use the Western Placidus system. That's for the masses. That's the psyop version. The real version is the 13 wheels version, which puts Saturn in a very key position, understanding matter and form and wisdom. And you combine matter and form with the wisdom of the constellations and the cosmos. And this is when you then are able to access the crown, the ether, and from there you can move beyond the veil into the 0 point energy of the creatrix, which is Ophiuchus. Now, Ain Soph, A-I-N, Soph is obviously, when you look at the etymology and you look at the original Soph, short for Sophia, and when you look at, say, Wikipedia, or you have to I use the Brave browser and DuckDuckGo and other browsers. I don't use Google very much at all. If you do a search under the Tree of Life, you'll get bombarded with the 10 Sephiro. You won't find much about the Kether, and you'll see that the word AIN has been changed to EIN, and Soph has been altered as well. And that's all designed to mask the role of the 13th sign of Sophia and the 13th energy of the Mother Creatrix. That all of this is form, and that is all brought to life by the divine feminine energy. And this is why we're at a tipping point in humanity right now, is because the forces, the principalities and powers that are trying to hold on to the old systems of Saturn, the institutes of Saturn, are trying to block this energy and the wisdom that comes from understanding the true cosmology and the true knowledge that comes from the stars. Sirius, Arcturus is another one. They're actually part of that divine sacred knowledge. But let's start with, as I said, I don't like to read, but you can see this, but I'm just going to pull a few pieces out of this. And let's start with the divine feminine archetype of Ceres or Persephone. Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, Ceres. So Ceres represents the natural world. She is the rhythms of the seasons, womanhood and fertility, parenting and reproduction, fostering and adoption. Her themes are unconditional love, relationships between parents and children. This is the archetype, this is the energy, these are the characteristics, the attributes of this particular character on the cosmic dance. So her themes: unconditional love, issues of devotion, attachment, separation, sacrifice, loss, and grief. Interactions with Ceres, as I said, also called Persephone. In the Greek and Roman pantheons, they exchange names, Ceres, Persephone. They remind us, Ceres reminds us to get back in touch with nature, to revere the organic feminine energy that connects us to the cycles of life. Oh, is that required now? Boy, oh boy. We are so out of alignment in humanity due to the Saturnian structures and the 5-day week, or the 7-day week as it is now, the 9-to-5 lifestyle. It's crazy. We're so out of touch with the cycles of life. So Ceres is about some of this energy, the returning energy, this feminine energy coming back to balance towards the masculine, which is just, it's too dominant. If you're looking at scales, it's very much tilted. Everything is Saturnian structure is tilted towards the masculine, and that has to change. That's the new leadership, is to balance it, which is Poseidon in Libra. And by the way, if you were looking at a Western chart, you'd never know that Poseidon even existed And if you did, he wouldn't be in Libra, he'd be in, I think, in the sign of Scorpio. And that, you've missed the point, you completely missed the point. He's in Libra, and he is a symbol, a metaphor of the new type of leader. So Hades, beg your pardon, so Ceres is reminding us to revere the organic feminine energy that connects to the cycles of life. Grief is a process of shock, anger, regret, resignation, realization, and finally acceptance. Something dies and something is born. So Ceres, in terms of the cycles of life, she's very much in touch with, you know, death and life and that doorway to when something dies, something is born. Hades, and this is the story of the abduction of Persephone or Ceres, and I think it's important to reflect on this, because this is the shadow side of Ceres, and this is some of the, let's call the psychic and emotional contents that exists within the Akashic records in all of us, whether you're male or female, because remember, in the theories of incarnation, that we've been both male and female throughout our lives. So we all hold the ability to reflect, and within our field, if you like, within our moon matrix, within our Akashic records, we will have remnants of this sort of abuse. And this is a story, but it's an important story of subjugation. It's an important story of the will being overridden by a male entity. So let's have a look at this anyway. You've probably heard the story, but we'll just whip through it. Hades was a fearsome deity who really left his kingdom. Now, Hades, also known as Pluto, again, if you're looking at the Greeks or the Romans, they're calling the same deity, different names, but Hades, Pluto, was a fearsome deity who really left his kingdom, and there are very few myths about him in ancient Greek sources. By far the most important, though, is Hades' abduction of Persephone, Demeter's daughter. That was one of the few times that Hades travelled above ground. Hades, hell, underground. The reason naturally was love. He fell for Persephone. However, Persephone did not want to give in easily, so Hades devised an ingenious ploy. As Persephone was gathering flowers with her maidens at the Nysian plain, he caused an indescribably beautiful flower to suddenly bloom before her. When Persephone reached out to pluck it, the ground under her opened, and Hades appeared before her, all dreadful and majestic in a 4-horse golden chariot, and took her with him to the underground. Demeter, the goddess of fertility, was so distressed at the absence of her daughter that she started fasting and wandered aimlessly. Finally, after 9 days, Hecate told her what had happened. After the all-seeing Helios confirmed the event, Demeter left Olympus as an act of protest to protest the injustice done to her daughter. With her gone, the earth was barren and infertile as a desert. 1 year passed, and the gods started worrying that the famine would wipe out humanity. So Zeus sent all the gods one by one to beg Demeter to come back. She was distressed, right? So her daughter had been captured, kidnapped. She didn't know where she was. So Zeus sent out all the gods, begging her to come back, promising her all kinds of gifts and functions. She only wanted one thing, and that was to see her daughter once again. So Zeus had no choice but to send Hermes, who is Mercury, to Hades, Pluto, with the request that he return Persephone, or Ceres, to Demeter, or Gaia. He complied, but only after making Persephone eat one pomegranate seed before leaving. This ensured that she would remain bound to his kingdom eternally. Now, the pomegranate, if you look at the ancient tarot, the pomegranate figures quite prominently in some of those cards. So that's what I'll say there, that, you know, all of this is all linked. Now, both sides had no choice but to accept Zeus's compromise. Persephone would spend 2/3 of the year with her mother, but 1/3 of it with Hades. And this is the part of the year which corresponds with the winter months, They say that Demeter retreats from Olympus to her temple at Eleusis to grieve the absence of her daughter Persephone. It is possible that Hades and Persephone did not have any children. However, some say that Zagreus may have been their son. Macaria is also claimed to have been Hades' daughter, but no mother is mentioned. So a very interesting story. I'll let you draw your own interpretations of that about Ceres. Now, that's certainly divine feminine energy, and there's a real story there about abduction and, you know, being held against her will. Let's continue. Vesta. Vesta is the guardian of hearth and home. She is the goddess in charge of the eternal flame, the one that keeps the household alive, safe, and well. Remember, this is in the mythology. Vesta is said to be the divine representation of the flame within us, the one that keeps us or gives us the spark of life. Some would say that that flame is the Kundalini. When you juxtapose the Greek and the Roman pantheons across to the Zen Buddhism and those Eastern spiritual religions and all the information that flows out of there about spiritual practice, which of course is thousands of years old as well. The flame is, and the spark of life is often related to the Kundalini rising, and that's definitely feminine energy, and that's a similar allegory to you know, the life is amplified, the physical form. The left brain is amplified by the right brain once the Kundalini or the spark comes to life, and the serpent, which is the female energy, uncoils and activates the 7 rays. But let's move on. Whenever Vesta is activated by us, this is from an astrological perspective, whenever Vesta is activated by a square, a conjunction, opposition, trine or sextile, this is a trigger to withdraw inwards, reconnect with the spirit fire of God, source, universal intelligence, UI, the primordial spark of creation. In ancient Rome, a sacred fire burned in the temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum. The flames were guarded by priestesses who were the only female clergy in ancient Rome. They swore a pledge to protect the fire at Vesta's altar and to keep it burning. Ancient Romans believed the extinction of the fire could bring terrible luck and misfortune to the empire, so their guardianship was especially important for the protection of the city. Each year on the 1st of March, the eternal fire was renewed. It continued to burn until the year 391, when pagan worship was outlawed by the emperor. Vesta had her own festival too, the Vestalia, which was celebrated only by women. They honoured her by walking in barefoot procession to the temple where the sacred fire burned. The goddess Vesta was the exceptionally beautiful firstborn daughter of the Titans Kronos and Rhea. Kronos, of course, being Saturn in the Roman pantheon, Kronos in the Greek, Kronos, Saturn, and Saturn is currently conjunct the Sun and Lilith and Pallas Athena, Pluto, Hades, and Jupiter. And so we see the Roman and Greek pantheons all coming together at this time. Just wow, 2021, they just all happen to be all lined up, and we've got all of these stories, which are engrams, allegories, symbols, characters that are deep in the psychology, deep in the morphogenetic fields, deep in the Akashic records, deep in the memory of all human beings. We have these stories in one version or another. Let's move on. She was a beautiful, exceptionally beautiful Vesta. And she was, again, these are myths and legends. So, you know, when it says she was swallowed by her father, Kronos, I've talked about that before, and I do quite a lot of discussion about Kronos in other blogs, so I won't stop here. Vesta was swallowed by her father along with most of her brothers and sisters. Her brother was Jupiter or Zeus, who later became the chief of the gods. Zeus managed to escape the huge appetite of Kronos, and he freed Vesta and the others from Kronos. In some stories, Kronos didn't literally swallow his children; he just kept them away, hidden away in a cave. But the symbol is that they were kept out of the public eye, and they were suppressed because Kronos was worried about being usurped by his children. So, being the first one eaten, she was the last one to be released. So the Romans considered her both the oldest and the youngest of the gods or the goddesses. Her lovely appearance gained Vesta the attention of many of the male gods. Both Apollo and Neptune proposed marriage to her, but she refused them and appealed to her brother Jupiter to allow her to remain an eternal virgin. The priestesses of Vesta took a vow of chastity and spent their time devoted to study and religious rituals. They were selectively chosen for the position when they were under the age of 10, taken from their parents, brought to the temple and sworn to celibacy for 30 years. The first 10 years were for study, the next to serve, and the last 10 were spent as a teacher. Once the 30 years had passed, the Vestal was retired and replaced. She was given a pension and allowed to marry. Now, part of what is locked up in the Akashic records and the history of humanity is this. It's these, they chose to do this, these Vestal versions, but they had 30 years of religious service, basically, and service to humanity and service to the state. And that flows through the timelines into today as a role that some females are still playing. And we can see vestiges of that vestiges coming from Vesta, but we can see that flowing through into some of the roles that are in play in 2021. Once the Vestal Virgin, who'd been in service in celibacy, left and she'd done her 30 years. She's only 40 at this stage, right? If they started, well, they're taken from the age of 10, so she might be late 30s, 40s, still a young. Some of them were retired and replaced. Some were given a pension and allowed, or she was given a pension and allowed to marry. Generally, the marriages were arranged by a high priest called Pontus Maximus, who was the overseer of the virgins. Marrying a former Vestal was considered an honour and lucky. However, many of the retired Vestals preferred not to marry at all and chose to keep their rights and live out their retirement on a comfortable nest egg. Notably, the ceremony for choosing the Vestal virgins was called a captio, which means capture, which is interesting. Seems a fitting title for a 30-year investment in service. Life as a Vestal virgin also had its privileges. They were escorted by guardians to all the public gatherings and rode in a carriage. As the Colosseum Games, they sat in special seats of honour with a great view of the events. Their judgment and character was considered impeccable, and they became trustees of important documents of the city and its citizens. Unlike the other women of the society, they were not subject to the rule of the male head of the household, which is fascinating. And along with that freedom came the right to own property. They also had the right to vote. The penalty for harming a Vestal was death. So these Vestal virgins were revered. Since they were married to the state, a physical relationship by a Vestal was considered treason. The punishment was to be buried alive in an underground chamber near the gates of the city. Since physically harming a Vestal was a crime, they were left to die with a few days of food and water. This horrific punishment was not something that happened very often, but there were a few cases over the 1,000 years of the Order of the Vestals, and we're starting to get into this idea of the cancel culture, going against the state. As one of very few goddesses immune to the spells of Venus, the goddess of love, Vesta could not be forced to love anyone. It is interesting that an unmarried childless virgin represented home life in ancient Rome. Nevertheless, the focus on family values and dedication to home life is a valued attribute today, supposedly, in both Christian homes and throughout society. Perhaps that's one of the roles that is being challenged, right, in the 21st century. It's I'd certainly say that that's up for grabs, right? That whole thing around the hearth and the home being run by the female, by the devout female. Vesta in Leo, which is where she is at the moment, represents fierce independence, confident self-expression in terms of her chosen path of service and the respect of society, which is a Leo lioness quality. So Vesta is currently in Leo, as I said, in the galactic zodiac, 32 degrees Leo. She's perfectly placed. That's a perfect representation of her energy, and the engram and the metaphor, the allegories, stories of Vesta. And but yet, if you were looking at a Western astrological, she would be sitting in Virgo, which I think is about subjugation, right? If you think about Virgo, the Virgin, I mean, that's all about, well, you know, be seen and not heard, and a whole bunch of other stuff, quote unquote, that goes with that. But yet she's not in Virgo, and there's a misrepresentation of her under the Western astrological system. She's not in Virgo. She's in Leo, and that's exactly where she should be, which represents that fierce independence. This is a path that was chosen. And, you know, yes, there was a bit of push and pull and there was some sacrifice, but they voted. They were not subject to the male head of the household. They could own property. They had special seats in honour at the Colosseum Games. And they were treated, you know, and they were also keepers of the flame, right? This feminine energy. So they were revered. They were treated with respect. And, you know, Vesta in Leo, which is where she should be, and why I talk about the galactic zodiac, because it restores her back to where she should be. And if that as a divine feminine quality, if there are females who wish to personify that and bring that energy through in their life in some way, shape or form, then having Vesta in Leo is absolutely the right expression of that. Juno. Juno is a sign of marriage and commitment. In Roman and Greek mythology, Juno was the wife of Jupiter, Zeus, and she was hailed for her unbreakable loyalty to her husband. She's also the guardian of soulmates. Juno has shades of Pluto, Venus and Scorpio and Libra energies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Juno because I've got a specific couple of blogs that I've done and that you can find on Juno as the mother of Vulcanus and the son. I think it's Juno and the tragic story of the mother and the son. So I encourage you to really deep dive into that, because she has a very, very interesting role in the the routine of the divine feminine, both as a mother and as a consort and as a lover and as a partner. And she's got, you know, Zeus in the mythology, he was all over the place, right? He couldn't keep it in his pants. Yet she stayed loyal, and then she ended up having a child who was considered the ugliest god, which is the Vulcan story, and Vulcan ended up marrying one of Zeus's other kids, Venus, and there's a whole lot of stuff there around Juno and the estrangement between her and his son and the issues between her and her husband, and then, you know, the interbreeding and intermarriage between the daughter and the son of the same father. So there's a whole lot there. Pallas Athena, she's currently in Capricorn, and she is conjunct to this grand conjunction at the moment involving Jupiter, Lilith, Saturn, and the Sun. And you also got Pallas Athena. Now, Pallas Athena is the mythological goddess originated from the head of Zeus, Jupiter, so again, another daughter of the great Zeus, a fully formed female warrior. She is associated with creative intelligence, particularly in war, healing, arts, and crafts. She expresses the energies of Aquarius, Leo, and Libra. Beautiful energy. She has an impartial eye for justice. After weighing both sides of an argument before making judgment, the energy of Pallas is tilted towards the masculine qualities However, she is about using both the left and right brain to articulate and assess situations and circumstances. I call Pallas Athena the warrior princess, channeling the warrior princess. Sedna, just before we look at Sedna, Pallas Athena, as I said, right now is in the sign of Capricorn. So she's in the belly of the beast right now. Capricorn, of course, being the home of the Tower of Babel, the Saturnian structures. So there's a lot of that type of warrior princess, strategic, creative energy needed in the eco space and the political space, in the media and health and all of these structures of Saturnian. We really need a lot of this Pallas Athena energy, this warrior princess energy, in the war against humanity, the war against our health. Artistic expression has gone very dark, and you know, when we look at some of the mythology, it's very, very evil what's coming through in the arts and crafts, or what we would call entertainment. So there's a massive role for Pallas Athena and the warrior princess energy to be coming back, and through divine feminine energy. These are all, so we've talked about Pallas Athena, we've talked about Juno, we've talked about Ceres or Persephone, we've talked about Vesta. Now we'll touch on Sedna. Excuse me. Sedna's astrological themes include transcendence and spiritual growth. Many astrologers believe that each quote unquote new planet represents a new aspect or level of consciousness that humanity starts to embrace from the moment of discovery. If this is true, Sedna represents the weird new outer limit of our consciousness, which is going to stretch our concepts of reality. A quote from NASA: in March 2004, a team of astronomers announced the discovery of a planet-like object or planetoid orbiting the sun at an extreme distance in the coldest region of our solar system. Mythically, there are several versions of the Sedna story. Inuit Sedna is a beautiful but vain maiden who is content living at home with her parents. She refuses several potential husbands. It seems so much of this about being married off. Venus was married off, Sedna was married off, Persephone was married against her will. Very interesting, yeah? The Vestals said, no, I'm going to make my own choice about my partner, as did Pallas Athena. But three of these feminine energies, in fact, when you include Venus, she was also married against her will, but that's another story. So there's a lot of that coming through in this. Anyway, she was beautiful, she was content living at home, she refused potential husbands, but finally conceded, or was coerced to marry by her father. Once again, we see this. She ends up marrying an evil bird disguised as a man and is whisked away to a distant island for a life of misery, just like Persephone, whisked away into the underworld. And her mother's pining for her, and you know, it's like, wow, what is this? So this is Lilith, it's all of this negative energy, all the negative side. This is what's going to come out, and it is coming out, and is due to come out. Her father, in this case, in the case of Persephone or Ceres being abducted by Hades or Pluto, it was mum that came to the rescue, Demeter or Gaia. In this case, it was the father. He comes to rescue Sedna, but on the way back in her father's kayak, the birdman attacks. In a vicious struggle that ensues, Sedna's father is either deliberately or inadvertently pushes Sedna overboard into the frigid Arctic waters. Sedna drowns in a dramatic scenario of deceit, betrayal, and abandonment. Sedna becomes the goddess of the sea, watching over the mammals of the oceans. And oh, those mammals, those beautiful porpoises and dolphins, oh, they're being attacked. The masculine energy attacking that high level of consciousness. Just disgraceful what's going on. It is disgraceful. Sedna has a head and torso of a woman and the tail of a fish. She is our mermaiden. She is our mermaid. Remember, she was only discovered 2004, so there's no way the Ptolemaic and the Romans and the Babylonians, I mean, they just didn't even have the technology to see all of this. And this is the same with a lot of these, you know. Juno, Pallas, Pallas Athena and Juno were around back in the pantheon, but some of these other energies like Sedna and Pholos and others that I talk about, they've only just come into consciousness, into the lexicon, if you like, in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Sedna's myth may exemplify a female who does not want to commit to marriage. She does not want to participate with men, or in some cases she might not even want to be here on earth due to her fear of being hurt, which is an unresolved issue arising from her unfortunate past in the karmic past, Akashic records, one that perpetuates a life of loneliness. But that is about to change as Sedna's path through the heavens reveals. The role of Sedna is to usher forth the next stage of humanity's awakening to Gaia's planetary consciousness. It is important to remember that Sedna is not from our world metaphorically. She occupies a slightly higher spiritual plane, while physically she inhabits the depths of the ocean. On both levels, she is just beyond the grasp and understanding of the unevolved consciousness of humanity. Humanity's capacity for greater spiritual awareness lies deep within our subconscious, and to awaken this latent energy is to connect with the energy of the earth. Sedna represents our freedom of spirit and tendency to fall victim to our own vulnerability, deceit, and betrayal. By rising above the illusion that we accept as reality, we can strive to strengthen our connection to the new feminine current of spiritual energy. As a goddess, Sedna was a bridge between the human world and the shamanic animal kingdom. She looked after her people by providing them food from the oceans. The seals and other marine life that formed as food were born of the goddess herself, so we see a direct connection between Sedna, her people, and the earth. In return for her generosity, she required adherence to spiritual practice. As she awakens in consciousness, Sedna reminds us that it is through communion with the ecology of our planet that we become part of the feminine current that will ensure our spiritual evolution to become elevated to the realm of the shaman. So this is all about getting back in touch with the earth and the rhythms, and it doesn't mean we have to return to nature as such in terms of letting go of some of our modern technologies, because I think that's a regressive view. I think it's more about saying that where's our spiritual practice, where is our awareness of the fact that we're out of touch with the rhythms of life and the rhythm of Gaia, and that the endless plundering, particularly of the sea. I mean, the seas are getting fished out, and as a collateral damage, we're destroying some of Sedna's kingdom, and that's just not acceptable. Not acceptable. Lilith, Black Moon Lilith represents a person's. Now, these energies, of course, can come through males and females, but they're feminine energies. So they represent the primitive impulses and behaviour in their rawest form. It reveals our repressed sexuality together with what makes us feel most vulnerable. Lilith expresses the dark side of one's personality very deep in the subconscious realms of our psyche. And I would even go further that Lilith contains all of the shadow side of the feminine that has been pushed around for a long, long time, thousands of years, and we're about to have a look at that now. Now, 13, I started this conversation as we begin to draw this back to the beginning. Now, this, I didn't write this, but I thought this was a massive blog, so I've just picked out some bits of it, and I won't read all of it, but it really illustrates, and it's going to segue nicely into where we finish this with the Tree of Life and the 13th sign of Ophiuchus, and how this all ties together with the cancel culture and this endless hunting down people who don't agree with the prevailing view that Rowan Atkinson so beautifully talks about. I mean, look at him. Isn't it interesting? Once again, as I said, here's a famous actor that's talking about a very issue that's going on right now. I mean, this guy is so, look, he's so in touch. He's either in touch with his feminine energy, or he's got some very, very good people around him who are saying, look, do this, you need to. So 13, this is written by Hiroki Sakai, so the intellectual property to her. 13 is the number associated with women and quote-unquote witches, regarded as sinister and evil. 13 is only unlucky to men, It is the number of the female goddess. Being is part of the lunar matriarchal society that presaged the Roman Empire, which was ruled by the moon. The Romans replaced the 13-month lunar calendar of 28 days with 1 day left over with their solar 12-month calendar with odd numbered days and a quarter day left. Like history books, the calendars were written by the victors. The Romans destroyed the female power base by fire and steel. And Ptolemy, who is the father of the Western astrological system, and I bang on about this, but this dude is responsible for so much of the timeline manipulation that we're experiencing today in the 21st century and the complete misrepresentation of astrology. So Ptolemy enslaved astrology in the service of Roman aggression and its bloody atrocities. Modern tropical astrology is the spawn of apologists and propagandists. This is written by a female and she's just ripping in here, right? Male tyranny and its use as a genuflection to the ideology that represents the worst of human nature. Bravo! Haters who are locked into a false sense of community will try to destroy Ophiuchus. That's why they've taken her out of the astrology. But you're going to see why she's been taken out. She needs to be in there. And if you're serious about using astrology and the tree of life to help with your ascension to accelerate, which is very powerful, Ophiuchus has to be in. And I speak on her behalf. I am an Ophiuchus moon, so I'm channeling Ophiuchus right now, and I'm pretty fired up on her behalf. So the haters have removed her. And maybe it's a simple case of the patriarchy just completely disliking the female healer and the leaders, someone in contact with the secret source of a woman's power, which men cannot control. That's the power to give birth, particularly. Ophiuchus was and is still in conflict with the male solar 12 sign view of the world. Well, there we go. What is that male 12 sign view of the world? That's astrology, clocked in at 12 signs of 30 degrees each. Isn't that a typical masculine way of dealing with the world? Isn't that an allegory? Isn't that a story that says that's exactly what's going on? We're so out of touch with the real rhythms. I mean, right now, people don't even know that Ophiuchus exists. There are Scorpio suns and moons and rising signs and out there who are actually Ophiuchus. Imagine if they knew that. Imagine if they could actually embrace that energy. But if they're following astrology, they're completely barking up the wrong tree at the moment. And that has to be put right. Ophiuchus represents both the perilous danger and hope of change, depending on what you can lose or gain. Ophiuchus is a female deity, and she was pegged as a saboteur of men's institutions because she guarded the temple of women, a shrine to natural law. She was and is a disruptor of a man's world. Ophiuchus was summarily removed from the zodiac by male astrologers to negate female power. During the Inquisition, and this is the cancel culture, right? During the Inquisition, the Roman Church viewed Ophiuchus and the number 13 as the devil's work and killed thousands upon thousands of innocent females, women and girls, and even men who associated themselves with them as reprisals. They killed Ophiuchus, or so they thought, to underscore an annexation of women's capabilities and their freedom. Ophiuchus is the healer. She repopulates the earth and she restores it. She comes to rectify the imbalances and injustice perpetrated by man and Saturnian structures in the male 10 Sephiro tree of life, which eliminated the Ein Sof, eliminated the creatrix, eliminated Sophia, who is Ophiuchus. How she accomplishes this, the imbalances and the rectifications and the restitutions, that's up to her, but the hopes of return to natural law also mean conversely the loss of faith in the laws of mankind and his armies and kings. Women and men are becoming more interested in integrating the energies of the ancient women's mysteries, and this has been foretold that in the days of revolution and evolution that women would reclaim their power and their place in the universe as containers of the sacred womb, as keepers of the primordial waters that will fill the essence of creation of all humankind and the multiverses. You may not be aware of it, but in ancient times, God was a goddess, and the number 13 was directly associated with her, and we'll validate that with the Tree of Life in just one moment. The divine energies, feminine energies, were connected to the cycles of the moon, more specifically the full moons, before the calendar was tampered with. Yes, our current calendar is quote, unquote, out of time. And the natural calendar that was created by the moon's timing has become solar in nature. This craziness that we have is sometimes 2 full moons, called blood moons and blue moons and wolf moons. It's all rubbish. But that is another story. It's all based on a 12 system which is completely out of touch with the rhythms of life. In ancient times, each month of the year had 1 full moon, and the number of months was, guess what? Not 12, but 13. Unfortunately, when the patriarchal culture, which is solar in nature, began wiping out the women's mysteries, worship and reverence, thereby taking complete control, that's when the 12-month calendar began being used. Roman emperors were male supremacists who treated women like concubines. They destroyed the female-led tribal societies whenever they found them. They annexed the land and political power of the Roman women. They removed the night sign of Ophiuchus, the queen of the lunar calendar, from the sun's ecliptic, and they reassembled the zodiac into the now universally accepted but bogus solar 12-sign system. They exculpated the women in the zodiac who held the esteemed places, except perhaps for the Vestal Virgins, except for maybe Pallas Athena. There were some exceptions, so it isn't all bad news. But look at this. The Leo female huntress became the lion. The Taurus dancing girl became the bull. Aries, the female protector, became the male god of war. And the kicker for me, Ophiuchus, herself had an unwarranted sex change to the Greek snake angler Asclepius, who became the modern father of medicine, the rod of Asclepius, and the modern day caduceus symbol of medicine. Let's just pause there for a moment. You've all seen it. You've all seen the iconography of the caduceus. The healer was originally Ophiuchus, feminine energy, but it got changed. The stories got changed. The name got changed from Ophiuchus to Asclepius. Instead of the mother of healing, which is the natural healing, that's the organic. It became the father of modern medicine, and oh my goodness, is that area so corrupt, so dark, so dirty, so messy, so removed from its original template. I mean, look, this is going out on a platform, and I can't even, I mean, I just nut off if I start going on any more about that. And you all know. But this is where this is part of the manifestation of the suppression and the return of the divine feminine. And let's close this out with a commentary on the crown keith of the Tree of Life and the 13 dimensions. This is jaw-dropping stuff, team. Above or beyond the Kabbalistic Tree of Life is the divine nature of the Creator, which is called the Ein Sof, A-I-N Sof, short for Sophia, which means without end. It implies the perfection and the limitless of the Creator, existing beyond all limitations of time and space. Below the Sephiro is the physical existence, which comes forth from the crown, from beyond the veil. The Tree of Life, Sephiro, is considered the link between the antimatter and the matter realms, the link between heaven and earth, beyond the veil, through the veil. You've heard all the expressions. The head of the Kether, rooted above the Sephiro, is the Ein Sof, the divine nature of the Creator. Because of this, the Kether is so lofty that it is incomprehensible to humanity and is called the most hidden of all hidden things. Ein, A-I-N, Ein Sof, Ein Sofor, the 3 veils that reside above the Tree of Life represent the outer limit of existence and the initial impulse of creation. Ein is the highest and the first of the veils. This is beyond the crown. It is literally translated as no, nothing, or no thing, or simply no. It is about absolute emptiness, the opposite of existence, complete absence. This is what we call the 0 point. Ein, A-I-N, means the fountain or the I. Think of this as the cascading energy of the creator, or the creatrix actually. So you start with 0 point. There is no thing. There is complete absence. This is 0 point. And this is what we're trying to achieve when we meditate and do mindfulness practice. We're trying to return, even fleetingly, to the aim, the AIM, which is the divine feminine energy of no thing that exists beyond time and space. Ein Sof, AIN, the second level. This is the middle of the three veils. And I'll show you a graphic. This will make sense in a moment. Ein Sof is the middle of the three veils. So the three veils that are beyond the crown, beyond form. This is the top level. This is where you get outside of the tree of life and you move into the ethers and the antimatter realms. You move into the quantum field, if you want to use that term. Ein Sof is the middle of the three veils and it precedes the Ein by necessity. It is literally translated as there are no limits. If there is no thing, then there are no boundaries or limitations. The limitless foundation, the eternal in its purest sense. So the name Ein means fountain or eye. The name Ein is also unisex. The name Sof, when you look at the etymology, means wisdom. So wisdom springs from no thing or the 0 point. And then Ein Sofer, which is the lowest veil of the three veils above the crown, this is this is how manifestation, this is how life came to be. It cascaded down from 0 point through the Ein Sof and through the three veils of the creation, and then cascaded down into form. So the Ein Sofer is the lower veil situated closest to the tree of life, and it precedes the Ein Sof. It means limitless or eternal light. So let's put this in a way that is a bit easier to understand. So the Ein is the fabric of consciousness in its original state of undifferentiated consciousness. It's the state of eyeless, egoless bliss, transcendence. It's what we all aim for. When we leave this physical body, when we do our meditations, when we do our mindfulness practice, when we get in touch, when we focus on our breathing, this is where we're going. The Ein Sof is the fabric of consciousness as it existed after the intensification. So what happens here, and this is where you tie in 0 point. Most of you will have heard of 0 point. We're trying to return to 0 point, which is the nothingness. It's the stillness between thoughts. It's the stillness between feelings. It's when you are in meditation state, there is nothing. You're observing. You are just simply being reconnected to source or universal consciousness. And it's hard to do, and I appreciate that it's only fleeting. But the more you meditate, the easier it gets and the longer it gets. But that 0 point is the return to source. In the Buddhism and the Zen, I think this is why I've shown this graphic here. What they're doing, this is one of the keys to manifestation, what they call emanation. To manifest anything, you've got to get to 0 point. And from 0 point, you move to single point. Now that's 0 point is the Ein. Single point is the Ein Sof, which is when you focus on something. So if you can imagine you're meditating, and this is the divine feminine energy, there's nothing, no thing, but then something floats into consciousness and you focus on it. And you bring single pointed focus to it. That is the cascading of the energy down. So that's the second step to manifestation. Once you've started at 0 point with nothingness, egolessness, bliss, transcendence, and you're observing, and something comes up in consciousness and you grab a hold of it, and you focus on it with single pointed energy, right? You give it the full force of your will, then what you produce when the combination of the Ein and the Ein Sof is the Ein Sofer, which is emanation, which is manifestation. So that's the way that those three work. This is all working beyond the veil. This is happening in the creative imagination, if you like. This is happening outside of our mind. This is happening outside of the time-space continuum. So this is the divine feminine energy of Ophiuchus. This is where the secrets of manifestation and creation come from Sophia, that come from Ophiuchus, that come from this technology, if you like, which is now starting to come into consciousness. And by the way, the secret schools have always known this. That's why they're trying to suppress it. Now, this is the last slide, and we'll have a quick look again at the chart, and then we'll wrap this up. So there are many icons, but I chose this one because it beautifully, and we started with this, but it beautifully shows what I'm talking about. Is that here's the 10 trees, the tree of life, and most of you will have heard of this. But just in summary, once again, we start with physical form. This is the bottom, this is 3D, if you like. And if you move up and through, here is the heart, right? This is the 4th dimension, right? And if you move up and through, you get up into the 5th and higher dimensions. To arrive, 3rd dimension, 4th dimension, heart is related to the 4th chakra, heart center. It's also related to the sun, right? And you get up and through, and as you develop knowledge, you get in touch with the star Sirius and that network, and I touched on that the other day. Sirius, Arcturus, the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. There's just an incredible amount that comes through that's been channeled from those higher energies, Pleiades, Arcturus, Sirius. Wisdom comes from understanding the role of all of these different players in the zodiac, right? It's specifically there. And understanding also how form is created. And as you move up and through the tree of life, you get to the crown chakra, or the 7th chakra, which is the Ketha, called the Ketha in the Sephiro. But beyond the Ketha, and it's interesting that the Archangel Metatron is illustrated there. We'll talk about Metatron and the Archangel completely at a different time, but Metatron is to do with the light body. It's to do with the management, the configuration, the coordination of your Merkaba light body, and that's real higher dimensional, DNA activation that we're talking about in there. But the Ketha, we've got these 3 layers that are beyond the veil. So this entire physical structure of physical form, which includes the planets Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the whole zodiac, this is all the physical manifestation, but down to us here in the kingdom of the earth. But where does it start? Mercury, Venus, Sun. Where does it all start? It starts with the divine feminine energy. And it just starts with the 0 point, which is the Ein Sof. And then the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof. So we start with 0 point, then you have single pointedness, and then you have emanation or manifestation, which cascades down into physical form. That is how the rules of manifestation work, based on the tree of life, which is a system which is taught in the sacred schools thousands of years. And some form of the structure is taught all over the sacred schools, all over the world. They might not call it the tree of life, they might call it something else, but the Zen Buddhists will call this single pointedness, and so they've got a different term for reaching that Brahman state, that transcendent state, the limitless state. Before you can manifest, you have to return, you have to overcome polarity, you have to overcome form. Form is separate. All of this is the physical form, is separate from the union of and the beginning of all form is actually the divine feminine. That is the creatrix, the mother womb of creation. So most of this, the tree of life, stops here, and that's why we think we've got this, what they call a base 10 system. The 10 is, there's only 10 numbers, but 0 point is the 0, and when you add in the 0, you actually got 11, and that is the portal to the 13 system, because you've got the 10 Sephiro, and you've got these 3 layers of the creatrix which exist beyond the veil, and that is where you get the 13 from. And that is probably a great place to leave this, and just to remind us of what Rowan Atkinson's saying, and this is blowing up all over social media right now. Look at him. I love it. I mean, that face. This is a guy, as I said, it's either him channeling the feminine energy and saying, look, this is just crazy what's going on. It's all harkens back. There's nothing new in the world, but it's time for this nonsense to stop. Cancel culture is equivalent. It's like a medieval mob looking for someone to burn. Unbelievable what's going on. And this is trending. And then look at the chart again to finish up. The sun is illuminating. Lilith is the suppression, right? She is the black moon, and the white moon's over here somewhere. But you look at Vesta, she's in a perfect place in Leo. That's where she should be. In the modern astrology, she's positioned in Virgo. That is incorrect. It gives an incorrect message. When you look at Juno, the consort, the faithful partner, you know, at the moment it says she's going through Scorpio. She's not going through Scorpio. She's going through Ophiuchus, and it's completely different. This is the restoration of the divine feminine. Yeah, totally different energy. Lilith, conjunct the Sun and Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto, in a stellium, full moon right now, with Pallas Athena right there as well, in the belly of the beast, the divine feminine represented in Pallas Athena, the divine feminine, or the repressed or suppressed. It's time for that to come out, represented here by dark moon Lilith. There's no coincidences in any of these configurations. This is why astrology is so incredible as a source of wisdom. And in the tree of life, you understand the cosmos not as a tool of divination, but as a tool of potential. And you look at Sedna, and I talked about the female shaman, and she's in Taurus. As I say, let's get back in touch with the earth. And yet, if we're following the Western astrology, they've got it stuck here in Gemini, and we completely miss the point. Sedna doesn't belong in Gemini. She's earthbound. This is higher level consciousness to do with how we treat sea and the creatures of the sea and the food of the sea. And Ceres down here in Aquarius. Now, we talked about her being the mother, you know, that Persephone. This is a new reconfiguration of Aquarius. Unacceptable that she was abducted like that. Well, time for her to be released from that. And that's what that Aquarian energy, that's a reconfiguration of that whole stay at home, do what you're told bollocks. So finally, and of course we've got the Uranian energy, which is sparking all of this up, and this is enlightenment. And there's a square in here, and if you understand squares, as I've talked about and elsewhere, that's a very important. Can't avoid that energy, but this is the lightning strikes the Tower of Babel, and the Tower of Babel's under a lot of duress and pressure right now. And what is so important as we close today is that Saturn is not in Aquarius. Saturn is in his home sign of Capricorn. So the great conjunction, when everyone talked about, oh my goodness, we've hit the zero, we've hit 0 degrees Aquarius. No, we haven't. We hit 0 degrees Capricorn. And it is way more important to understand the traverse of Saturn in his own sign, that he is in his own home sign for 2.5 years. He does not leave here until 0 degrees Aquarius in the true galactic zodiac, the true sacred divine system. He does not hit Aquarius until when? February 2023. So what does that say? We've got 2.5 years, people. We've got 2.5 years of a lot of, there's a lot going to go on. But if Saturn's it's not just a malefic, he's also a benefic. You know, some of the structures that we've got today do work, but they just need to be transformed and revisited and rethought about. And that's the new leadership represented by Poseidon, who just happens to have shown up sitting there in Libra. Happens to be sitting in Libra with a square to where? Capricorn. We have a enlightenment energy coming from the square here, and we've got an enlightenment, the new leader, type of leader coming from Poseidon, represented in Libra. That is the new leader. And we've got all this feminine energy going on here. We've got a revisiting of what it means to be a partner in a twin flame in Ophiuchus, returning to the original template. We've got Sedna, the female shaman, in her sign. We've got the Vestal Virgin in the fire sign of Leo, where she's revered and treated beautifully, exalted there. And we've got Ceres with a reconfiguration of that template of the stay-at-home mum. And we've got Pallas Athena, who's in the belly of the beast. Look at her, the warrior princess. She's right in the thick of it right now. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day. Bye.